President Carter went up on the roof of the White House today to show off the new solar water heaters installed there, and he called for using solar power to produce 20% of this country's energy within 20 years. Here's Judy Woodruff at the White House.
These solar panels at the White House cost almost $30,000, and they heat only the water in the building's west wing. But they are meant to symbolize the Carter administration's commitment to solar energy. During dedication ceremonies today, the president said solar energy is safer and more reliable than the energy we depend on now.
That was June 1979, in the midst of a national energy crisis. Americans just getting used to waiting in long lines at gas stations when President Jimmy Carter warmed his hands on those newly installed solar panels and promised tax credits to anyone in the country who put up solar panels on their homes and businesses. Let's get energy independent of these meddlesome Middle Eastern oil states. Go solar. Well, 7 years later, a Republican president named Ronald Reagan had the solar roof panels taken down, supposedly for roof repairs, but he never put them back up, and they ultimately ended up gathering dust in a warehouse in Virginia. This summer, though, new and improved solar panels got put back up on the White House roof once again as part of a green overhaul of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The new solar panels are expected to pay for themselves in energy savings over the course of President Obama's tenure and into that of the next president. But just down the street, in a big meeting going on right now at the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Washington, the White House's solar panels are the object of scorn and strategy. It's the meeting of the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC. It's the conservative policy writing consortium where mostly Republican legislators shop for right-wing proposals to pass in their states. Among ALEC's offerings this year are initiatives to punish American homeowners who choose to go solar. The idea is to make solar-powered homeowners pay a penalty for using fewer fossil fuels, disincentivize renewable energy. In internal ALEC documents obtained by The Guardian newspaper, ALEC's stated objectives for 2014 include a new focus on blocking renewable energy initiatives in the states and at the federal level. They're touting their efforts to introduce new laws that reform, freeze, or repeal state renewable energy mandates. These internal documents obtained by The Guardian boast that 15 states have already introduced this kind of legislation with ALEC's help, and that is ALEC's whole reason for existing. They try to get their bills copied and passed as law in as many states as possible. That's what they do. The American Legislative Exchange Council. They write or they take model legislation and then they shop it to other states. Sometimes it's bills that have already become law, like in Wisconsin, the bill stripping union rights, or in Florida, the Stand Your Ground law, the so-called Castle Doctrine law. The nationwide proliferation of that idea from Florida was once a shining achievement for ALEC, creating a whole new legal determination for justifiable homicides in states across the country. The Stand Your Ground Castle Doctrine thing was a proud achievement for them, until the case of a Florida teenager named Trayvon Martin, who was shot and killed by an armed neighborhood watchman named George Zimmerman, who was found not guilty of committing second-degree murder in that case. The case, of course, got a ton of national attention. And the Stand Your Ground laws got a ton of national attention. And since then, many of the very familiar, very powerful companies with interests in ALEC have stopped their association with the organization. Our parent company, Comcast, has not ceased its association with ALEC, but lots of companies with household names like Coca-Cola and Kraft and Pepsi, even Walmart, very publicly ceased being dues-paying members of ALEC in the midst of that controversy. Even after ALEC announced that it was getting out of the gun rights business and they'd eliminate their entire task force that wrote the Stand Your Ground bill, companies kept fleeing from the controversy. And it has had an effect, apparently, on this very well-funded, very, very influential conservative organization. The Guardian newspaper today posted a dossier of internal ALEC memos and reports showing that a third of ALEC's revenue is gone year over year, owing to big corporate members leaving the organization. ALEC has also lost 400 state legislators from their ranks. The group is so worried about this attrition that they reportedly have started an initiative to try to at least get those big corporate donors back, trying to woo dozens of their former well-heeled corporate members back to the organization with something that is reportedly called the Prodigal Son Project. Also, a promise to keep members' names anonymous with a new organization designed in the 501c4 category, which means that donors could remain undisclosed to the public while they supported ALEC. They could keep supporting the group, but avoid the embarrassment. Something that may, in fact, make corporate members more comfortable with the aggressive legislative agenda that ALEC promotes, especially if they're able to deliver on that promise of anonymity. Other documents posted by The Guardian reveal that ALEC is not only trying to recover its corporate revenue, they're also trying to bolster their footing with Congress and state legislatures. They'll be asking for a stronger commitment from lawmakers that have stayed true to the organization, asking that legislators pledge to act with care and loyalty and put the interests of the organization first. Put the interest of the organization first. How about the constituents that voted you into office? Joining us now is Ed Pilkington. He's chief reporter for The Guardian newspaper, which broke the story about ALEC. Mr. Pilkington, thank you very much for being here tonight.
It's great to be here.
It's a long story, and you recovered a lot of information from this group about which people have been very curious but known very little. I should just ask you at first if I misstated any of that, or that pretty much
pretty well put.
Represents. Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think is the big finding from this document dump? What have we learned about this group that we didn't know before?
Well, the thing that caught our attention, you mentioned it, was the Prodigal Son Project, as they called it, stamped on the top of one of their documents. They misspelled it. They called it the Protical with a C rather than a G. So you can't get everything right in life. But nevertheless, it listed underneath it 41 companies, Coke, Pepsi, Walmart, GE, all the big companies in America who they've lost in the last couple of years and are now desperate to get back. And that's a sort of affirmation of what we'd kind of learned bit by bit, which is that ALEC is in trouble. And I think the reason why they're in trouble really goes to the heart of it. One of the great strengths of ALEC was their secrecy. They're a very secret organization, and that suits the companies who back them. Most of their money comes from corporations, and the corporations turn up into a room, they meet the legislators who are introduced to them, they together vote on legislation, which then gets passed around the states. If that's done in secret, that's fine. That really suits them. They get what they want, whether it's lower taxes or legislation to stop climate change regulation, to stop people putting up solar panels on the roofs that you mentioned. That's great, but when it becomes public, if their spotlight is put on what ALEC is doing, and the work that the Centre for Media and Democracy has done and other groups have done tirelessly over the last couple of years to open the door on their activities, there's one thing that corporations like less than taxes and regulation, and that is bad publicity. And that's the story of the Trayvon Martin fallout. ALEC got caught up in that controversy of stand your ground laws, which they'd helped to spread right across America. 26 states still have them, partly due to ALEC's influence. When ALEC got caught up in that, a lot of the big companies grew cold feet, and they ran as fast as they could.
So in terms of their strategy for wooing back corporate sponsors, is the promise of anonymity a key part of how they are intending to win corporations back? And do you think that the sort of restructuring they're describing could actually effectively let them offer their corporate sponsors the anonymity that they seek?
It's partly anonymity, and it's partly increasing sense of regulation over lobbying. Now, ALEC says it's not a lobbyist. It says it does absolutely no lobbying at all. Now, if you get two people in the room, one is a state legislator, another is a big corporation, and they agree legislation together, they vote on it together, that legislation gets taken up by a state assembly, becomes law. Now, is that lobbying? I think
could just be a beautiful relationship.
It could just be a bit of fun that they're having in this room, or it could be maybe a little bit of lobbying going on there. There's a huge grey area in America about lobbying, and I think it's going to become more and more important. Last week, Obama flagged it up. Mm-hmm. They said they're not going to allow lobbying for groups like Karl Rove's group that actively do electioneering and do TV advertising. Now, ALEC doesn't do that. It doesn't get involved in election campaigns. It does arguably something even more serious, which is to get involved in what happens to those people once they're elected. What happens to someone who gets elected as a state assemblyman, and what laws are they going to pass? Now, that's when ALEC gets involved. And I think there's going to be more and more debate about lobbying and what's acceptable. ALEC is a tax-exempt charity. It's called an educated body. And yet what it does is cook up legislation that gets adopted by states.
If I had the choice of choosing who could be elected in a particular election, or writing the laws that person would introduce as a legislator once they were there, I know which one I would pick. Ed Pilkington, chief reporter for The Guardian newspaper. Thank you very much for your time tonight. This is a fascinating story. Congratulations on this.
Thank you.
Thanks. We'll be right back.